Tennessee holds some of the oldest and most puzzling stories in the Southeast. From hidden stone forts and ancient cannons to strange mound sites and legends that reach back before written history, the state is filled with places that feel older than the land itself. These mysteries still shape the quiet hills, thick forests, and winding rivers, leaving questions that no one has fully answered. The Bell Witch Cave Preseler Legends. When you stand outside the Bell Witch Cave, the first thing you notice is how quiet the place feels. Not peaceful, exactly, more like the land is holding its breath. The cave sits at the base of a limestone ridge in Adams, Tennessee, partly hidden by trees in the curve of the hillside. There's a small stream running nearby, and even that sound seems softer than it should be. People talk a lot about the Bell Witch haunting from the early 1800s, but the story didn't begin with the Bell family. The cave already had a name, a mood, and a shadow over it, long before any settler ever stepped onto this land. That older chapter is the part most visitors don't know, and it's what makes the place feel so strange the moment you get close. If you walk toward the entrance, there's a steady flow of cool air coming out. It doesn't matter if it's July or January. The cave breathes like it has its own rhythm. The opening isn't huge, just a jagged mouth in the stone, but once you step inside, it feels bigger than you expect. The walls narrow in places, then open again, and your footsteps echo in odd ways. Even with a flashlight, there are pockets of darkness that seem thicker than the rest. Long before the Bells lived here, the native people of the area knew the cave well. For them, a place like this wasn't just part of the landscape. Caves were seen as doors into the world beneath our own. A place where the living and the spirits could cross paths if they weren't careful. There were old stories passed down through families who lived in this region long before American settlers arrived. These stories talked about a woman-like presence in the rocks. She didn't have a single name because stories shift from group to group, but the idea stayed the same. She was a spirit of the ridge, someone who lived inside the stone. She wasn't fully kind or fully cruel. She was a watcher, a guide, and sometimes a trickster. Hunters said she could help them if she chose, or she could lead them in circles to test their patience. Some ties described her voice echoing through the cave when people came too close without offering respect. When you stand there today, it's not hard to imagine why. The cave has an odd way of changing your sense of direction. Even modern visitors say they feel lost after only a few steps into the darker chambers. If you turn off your light, the darkness doesn't just sit in front of you, it presses around you. If you breathe too fast, the silence seems to push back. It's not surprising that the first people who lived here treated the cave with caution. You can't blame them for thinking something lived inside. A presence, a voice, or even just the cave itself acting alive. Archaeologists have found pottery fragments, stone tools, and signs that people moved through this area for thousands of years. The region was part of a vast network of mound-building cultures. While the cave itself doesn't show a clear sign of ceremonies the way some others do, it's close enough to major ancient sites that its importance was almost certainly understood. In many parts of the Southeast, caves were used for offerings or rites meant to guide spirits. When you look at the Bell Witch Cave through that lens, it feels less like a random spot on a farm and more like a threshold. People were careful not to disturb. There's a pattern in the old legends that stands out. The spirit woman of the ridge wasn't purely fearsome. If they mocked her or acted careless near her cave, she answered with tricks or with a strange, heavy feeling that followed them home. You see echoes of this in later stories. The Bell Witch haunting is full of moments where the spirit acted playful one second and harsh the next. People today usually treat those as ghost story details, but if you trace them back to the older tales, the personality lines up in a way that feels too close to ignore. Hunters from the early 1700s who passed through the region told stories that sound familiar today. Some said they heard footsteps behind them near the ridge. Others said they saw faint lights drifting by the cave entrance at night, like fireflies moving in steady patterns instead of random flickers. A few French traders recorded hearing singing near the bluff. These tales weren't written with the idea of a Bell Witch in mind. They came from people who had no clue a family named Bell would ever settle there. They were simply describing what they saw and felt near a place that had a long, strange history. When the settlers arrived, they didn't have the same beliefs about caves. They saw the land as practical space fields, forest, water. But even then, the cave made people uneasy. Kids used it as a place to dare each other. But the stories they came home with were always the same. Whispering sounds in the dark, something tugging at their clothes, torches blowing out even when the air felt still. These weren't stories told in dramatic ways. They were simple remarks from kids who didn't have a reason to make up legends yet, and that makes them harder to ignore. By the time the Bell family moved to Adams, the cave already had a quiet reputation, not a famous one, but enough that locals warned each other not to spend long inside. The Bell children, being curious and adventurous, explored the cave often, one of the most repeated stories from that time claims that a boy got stuck when part of the floor shifted, trapping him in a pocket of rock. According to the tale, an invisible force pulled him free just as he ran out of air. Whether or not it happened, it shows what people already believed about the cave. Something unseen lived there, something with a mind of its own. The more you look at the timeline, the more it feels like the Bell Witch story didn't begin with the family at all. The personality of the spirit that struck the Bell family seemed to match the woman in the stone figure from the older native stories. Playful, sharp, unpredictable, and very protective of her space, she responded to disrespect instantly. It has a pattern that shows up across centuries of stories tied to one specific place on the Tennessee frontier. Today, when you visit the cave, the guides tell the known stories, but the atmosphere does most of the work. The inside is cool and damp. Your shoes slip a little on smooth stone. The air smells like wet earth and minerals. When people reach the back chamber, some say they feel a sudden chill across their shoulders. Others feel pressure around their ears, like someone is standing close behind them. A few visitors say small rocks fall near their feet with no sign of loose stone above. These moments don't happen to everyone, but the fact that they happen at all keeps the cave's old reputation alive. Some visitors don't feel anything unusual. They walk in, take the tour, step out, and say it's just a cave. And that's part of what makes the place mysterious. A real mystery doesn't scare everyone. That's how older cultures described it, and that's how people talk about it today. The land has a personality, and the cave is its center point. If you stand at the mouth of the cave long enough, the area starts to feel older than the farms around it. The stream trickles over rocks worn smooth by centuries of feet passing the same path. The shadows shift as the trees move in the wind. You can almost imagine someone from hundreds of years ago standing in the same spot, feeling the same strange pull from the darkness inside. Whether you think the cave holds a spirit or whether you think it is just a place with a strong atmosphere, something about it feels like it remembers every story told about it. Every whisper, every footstep, every moment of fear or respect, that memory lingers in the air, in the stone, in the cold breath of the cave drifting out onto the daylight. And even without the Bell family's later story, the cave would still feel the same, like a doorway into something deeper than the rock itself. The strange stone fort of Old Stone Fort State Park. If you walk into Old Stone Fort State Park on a quiet morning, the first thing that hits you is how peaceful the place feels. The trees stand tall on both sides of the trail, and the sound of rushing water echoes from the two rivers that circled the site. It looks like a simple hiking spot at first, but when you reach the open field at the center, you feel something different. And that's when you notice the walls, long, low stone lines stretching out across the land like the remains of something built with purpose. This is Old Stone Fort, one of Tennessee's oldest and most mysterious places, and nobody completely agrees on why it was built. The name fort is a little misleading. When early settlers found the place, they saw stone walls and assumed it must have been some kind of military site. But once archaeologists studied it, they realized the walls wouldn't stand up to any kind of battle. They're not tall, and they're not thick enough to defend against a real attack. Instead, they stretch in a long arc, bending with the shape of the land, almost like they were made to guide people along a path. When you stand there today and look at the layout, it feels less like a fort and more like a gathering space, somewhere with meaning for the people who lived here long before settlers arrived. The site sits on a high plateau between two rivers, the Duck and the Little Duck. Over thousands of years, the water carved deep gorges into the rock, leaving a natural peninsula that looks like a stage or a giant platform. The ancient builders took advantage of the shape and added the stone walls to complete the design. When you see it from above, the layout looks intentional, not random, not sloppy, but planned. That alone makes the place feel strange because the builders left no carvings, no written hints, and no tools behind to explain why they worked so hard to shape this land. What we do know is that the site is old, older than many civilizations people talk about in school. Most archaeologists agree that Old Stone Fort was built more than 2,000 years ago during what is known as the Middle Woodland period. This was a time when several indigenous cultures were building mounds, stone structures, and earthworks across the eastern United States. Many of these sites had ceremonial purposes connected to the sun, the seasons, or events that mattered to the community. Old Stone Fort fits that pattern in some ways, but in others, it stands alone. One of the oddest things about the site is the front entrance. It lines up with the sunrise on the summer solstice. If you stand in the right spot early on that morning, the sun rises perfectly between the walls and lights the open field inside. It feels too perfect to be an accident. The builders knew the sky. They knew exactly how the seasons moved. They built this place so that the first light of the longest day of the year would pour into the heart of the enclosure. Standing there as the sun lifts over the trees, you get the sense that you're watching something people have watched for thousands of years. The stone walls themselves don't look like much until you get close. They're made of stacked slabs of limestone, most of them flat and easy to shape. They aren't tall, but they stretch for nearly half a mile. That's a lot of work for a structure without houses, without storage pits, without signs of daily life. People didn't live inside Old Stone Fort. They came here for something else. Some believe it was a gathering place for ceremonies. Others think it might have been used for rites connected to life, death, or renewal. A few researchers think it may have been a place for music and sound because the cliffs and open spaces create natural echoes that bounce in unusual ways. If you stand in the center and clap your hands, the echo doesn't sound normal. It rolls across the open field and bounces off the cliff faces like a soft drum. You can imagine hundreds of people gathered here listening to music or joining in a ceremony where sound mattered just as much as the rising sun. When the wind moves through the trees and the two rivers roar below, the whole place feels like it was chosen for the way it sounds as much as the way it looks. Local stories add even more layers to the mystery. Early settlers said the area felt watched, though they couldn't explain why. Hunters reported hearing footsteps behind them on the trails when no one was there. And long before the park existed, locals warned children not to wander too close to the river bends after dark because shadows moved strangely there. Whether those stories came from real events or just the uneasy feeling the place gives off, they added to Old Stone Fort's reputation as a place with energy that outlived its builders. There's also the question of why the culture that built the fort suddenly abandoned it. There's no record of conflict, no burn marks, no sign of disaster. It's as if the people simply stopped using the site and moved on. When you walk the trails today, it's hard not to wonder what changed. Did the river path shift? Did the community split or travel elsewhere? Or did the meaning of the site fade as generations passed? The silence around that question makes the place feel even older, like the land is holding a memory it doesn't share as the waterfalls around the forts add another layer of atmosphere on all sides. Water drops into deep pools carved over centuries. The sound of falling water blends with the wind and turns the whole place into a natural amphitheater. You can see why the builders chose this spot. It has a sense of protection but also openness. When you stand at the cliff edge and look down at the roaring water, you feel how strong the land is. And when you turn back toward the field, you feel how carefully it was shaped. Modern visitors come here mostly to hike and relax. But many say the same thing without being prompted. The place feels old. Not just historically old, but old in a way you can sense. People say the air seems heavier in the center of the site. Some mention feeling watched the same way early settlers did. Others say the sound of the river fades for a moment when they step inside the old walls, as if the land wants their attention. It never feels threatening, but it does.